In 2005, an American businessman borrowed roughly £525 million to buy a football club and structured the deal so the club itself had to pay back the debt, not him. That club was Manchester United. 19 years later, fans still protest in the streets every single season, and yet the family that owns it has made billions of dollars. Meanwhile, just up the road, another club, Everton, was recently valued at less than the price of a single luxury apartment building in central London, despite having a stadium, academy, and a passionate fan base of hundreds of thousands. Here's the strange truth about football clubs. Almost none of them turn a profit doing what they're actually in business to do: win football matches. Most lose money every single year. Some lose money for decades in a row. And yet billionaires, sovereign wealth funds, and private equity firms are lining up, paying record prices to own them. So what is actually going on? Why does an industry that loses money attract some of the richest people and institutions on earth? That's what we're going to unpack today. The real economics of owning a football club. Let's start with how a football club actually makes money. There are three main revenue streams, and every major club depends on some mix of all three. Matchday revenue is the oldest source: ticket sales, hospitality boxes, concessions. For a big club like Arsenal or Real Madrid, a single matchday at a full stadium can bring in several $1 million. But here's the catch. Stadiums only hold so many people, and you can only play so many home games a season. Matchday revenue has a hard ceiling. Broadcast revenue is where the real money lives today. Domestic and international TV rights deals are what transformed football from a local pastime into a global entertainment product. The English Premier League's domestic and international broadcast deals are worth billions of dollars per season, split among the 20 clubs based on final league position and how often they're shown on television. This is why staying in a top league or getting promoted into one is worth so much more than the prize money on paper suggests. Relegation from the Premier League can cost a club over $100 million in broadcast income in a single year. That single number explains almost every seemingly irrational decision a struggling club makes near the end of a season. Commercial revenue is the newest and fastest growing category. Shirt sponsorships, stadium naming rights, global brand partnerships, and merchandising. Add these three together, and a top 20 global football club can generate anywhere from $200 million to over $800 million a year in revenue. That sounds enormous. So why do most of these clubs still lose money? Here's the part that makes football almost unique among global businesses. Player wages and transfer fees eat almost everything. At most top European clubs, wages alone consume somewhere between 60 and 90% of total revenue. For context, a normal, healthy business tries to keep labor costs well under half of revenue. Football clubs routinely blow past that, and regulators have spent years trying, and mostly failing, to stop it. Why does this happen? Because of a brutal competitive dynamic. Winning matters more than profit. A club that underspends on players risks relegation, and relegation is catastrophic for revenue, as we just covered. So owners are trapped in an arms race. If your competitor spends more to avoid the drop or chase a trophy, you often have to match them, even if it means running at a loss, because the alternative, losing your league status. Then there are transfer fees, the money clubs pay each other to buy players out of contract. These fees don't show up as a cost all at once. Accountants spread them out over the life of a player's contract, a process called amortization. But the cash still has to leave the building up front, often financed through debt. Add stadium maintenance, academy investment, travel, staff, and interest payments on acquisition debt. Remember the Manchester United example from the intro, and you get an industry where operating losses are not the exception. They're closer to the norm. Some leagues have tried to fix this. European football's governing body introduced financial fair play rules, designed to stop clubs from simply spending unlimited borrowed or gifted money to buy success. The results have been mixed. Clubs backed by nation-states or ultra-wealthy owners have found creative ways to boost commercial revenue through sponsorship. Deals with companies connected to the ownership group. Deals regulators have struggled to prove are inflated, even when they look suspicious on paper. So we're left with a genuine puzzle, an industry with a structural tendency to lose money, propped up by rules that are hard to enforce. And yet, purchase prices for these clubs keep going up. If the operating business loses money, why do smart, wealthy people keep buying football clubs? There are 5 real answers, and they rarely apply in isolation. Most owners are motivated by some blend of all 5. Reason 1. Asset appreciation independent of profit. A football club is a scarce asset. There are only 20 spots in the Premier League, and only a handful of truly global clubs whose brand recognition spans continents. Scarcity plus rising global demand from American investors, from Gulf state wealth funds, from private equity, pushes valuations up regardless of whether the club posts an annual profit. Owners aren't necessarily trying to make money running the club day to day. They're betting the franchise itself, the brand, the fan base. The media rights attached to it will be worth dramatically more in 10 years. The same logic that applies to owning an NFL or NBA team in the United States, where team values have climbed for decades almost independent of on-field performance. Reason 2. Real estate and infrastructure leverage. Several recent club purchases are really thinly disguised real estate plays. A stadium sits on valuable land. Redeveloping or expanding it, adding retail, hotels, or housing around it, can generate returns that have nothing to do with football itself. This is a well-known strategy among American sports team owners, and it's increasingly showing up in European deals too. Reason 3. Soft power and reputation laundering. This is the most politically sensitive reason, and it's a real, well-documented one. Owning a globally beloved football club buys a level of public attention, goodwill, and legitimacy that almost no other purchase can. For sovereign wealth funds and state-linked investors, critics argue this functions as a reputational tool, a way to shift a country's global image away from controversial politics and toward glamour, sport, and community pride. Defenders of these deals counter that this criticism is often applied selectively, and that state and private investment in sport is a long, normal tradition that the same soft power label could just as easily be applied to any wealthy individual or company that sponsors sports for goodwill. It's a genuinely contested debate, and reasonable people land in very different places on it. Reason 4. Tax and financial engineering. Clubs can be structured to shift losses and debt in ways that create tax advantages elsewhere in an owner's broader portfolio, similar to how sports franchise ownership is often used in the United States. This isn't the flashy headline reason, but for sophisticated ownership groups, it's a real part of the calculation. Reason 5. Pure passion and status, with fewer market checks than you'd expect. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. Being introduced as the owner of a globally famous football club is one of the most powerful status symbols money can buy. And crucially, because so many owners are driven by revenue growth, reputation, or long-term asset value rather than annual profit, football clubs face far less market discipline than a typical business. A restaurant that loses money for 10 straight years closes. A football club that loses money for 10 straight years might still triple in valuation because the people bidding on it were never optimizing for that number in the first place. This is really the core insight of the whole video. Football club ownership isn't a broken business model. It's a different kind of asset entirely, closer to owning a rare piece of art, a media company, and a piece of prime real estate, all fused into one purchase, wrapped in a product that happens to be the most emotionally engaging form of entertainment on the planet. Not every club is bought for the same reason, and the differences are worth walking through because they show the full range of this asset class. At one end, you have state-linked ownership, wealth funds acquiring clubs and pouring in resources, well beyond what the club's own revenue could support. The financial losses are almost irrelevant to the buyer's balance sheet. The strategic and reputational value is the entire point. In the middle, you have American sports ownership groups bringing a very different mindset, treating clubs like they would treat an NFL or NBA franchise. Focus on commercial revenue growth, brand expansion into the U.S. market, disciplined-ish spending, and long-term value appreciation rather than short-term trophy chasing. This explains why so many American billionaires and investment groups have bought stakes in European clubs over the past several years. They're applying a U.S. franchise value playbook to an undervalued global market. At the smaller end of the spectrum, you have community and passion project ownership, smaller clubs, bought by wealthy individuals or groups, more for love of the game, local ties, or the appeal of turning around an underdog, where the economics look completely different. Modest revenues, tighter budgets, and success measured in promotions rather than global trophies. And increasingly, you have private equity and institutional capital entering the picture, not buying whole clubs, but buying leagues, minority stakes, and media rights packages, treating football the way they'd treat any other alternative asset class. A long-duration bet on the continued global growth of sports media rights. Each of these ownership types is playing a genuinely different financial game, even though from the outside, they all just look like someone bought a football club. None of this is risk-free. Debt-financed acquisitions can trap a historic, beloved institution under crushing interest payments, straining the relationship between owners and supporters for years. Regulatory bodies continue tightening the rules around related party sponsorships, and past creative accounting workarounds may not remain available forever. Relegation remains the single most catastrophic financial event that can hit a club, instantly vaporizing a huge share of annual revenue. And a growing wave of political and regulatory scrutiny around ownership vetting, financial sustainability, and independent regulators in some countries is slowly reshaping how much freedom owners have to run clubs purely as trophy assets. In other words, this remains one of the strangest asset classes in the world, glamorous, resistant to normal profit logic, but not immune to real financial gravity. So, would you actually want to own a football club? If you're looking for a stable, cash-generating business with predictable annual profit, this is probably one of the worst-performing asset classes you could choose. Most clubs lose money most years, tied to a labor cost structure that resists almost every attempt at control. But if you're looking for a scarce, globally recognized brand, tied to real estate upside, media rights growth, and a level of cultural relevance no ordinary business could ever buy, football clubs might be one of the most interesting long-term assets on earth. That's the real economics of owning a football club, an industry built to lose money on paper, and yet somehow one of the hottest assets in the world. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know in the comments which business or asset you want the economics of owning to cover next.